Officer Mark Delaney was a man who wore his uniform like armor. A 10-year veteran of the city's police force, he had grown used to people stepping aside when he walked in, to heads nodding in forced respect, and to the sense that he was untouchable when he had his badge pinned to his chest. One evening, patrolling a quiet neighborhood, he noticed a black SUV parked at an odd angle. The driver, a woman in a sleek blazer, appeared to be typing something on her phone. Delaney pulled over, stepped out with authority, and approached the vehicle with his flashlight raised. "License and registration," he demanded, tapping the window sharply. The woman looked up calmly, rolled her window down halfway and replied, "Is there a reason you're stopping me, officer?" Delaney didn't like the tone. He was used to nervous compliance, not assertive confidence. "This is a safety check. I'll ask you again. License and registration." She obliged without a word but maintained eye contact the whole time. As he looked over her ID, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "Danielle Price?" he read. "You an attorney or something?" "Something like that," she answered without elaboration. Delaney gave her documents a cursory glance and returned them. "You're free to go. Just don't linger like that around here. People get nervous." As he walked back to his car, he didn't realize he'd just made a critical error. He didn't recognize the name, but Danielle Price wasn't just some professional. She was a federal civil rights litigator, and she had just started building a case. Danielle Price didn't slam her car into gear or speed off in frustration. She simply drove away, calmly and deliberately, her mind already organizing what had just happened. Years of courtroom experience had taught her one thing above all: never react emotionally, document, analyze, act with precision. As soon as she got home, she opened her laptop and began typing up notes while the encounter was still fresh. She included timestamps, exact phrasing, and body language. Her fingers flew across the keys like a pianist playing a familiar piece. She wasn't interested in revenge. She was interested in accountability. Within the week, she filed an official complaint with the department's Internal Affairs Division, not as a citizen but as legal counsel representing herself. She also submitted a formal request for the officer's body cam footage and dispatch records. Meanwhile, Officer Delaney received a polite but unexpected notice from his supervisor. He was to attend a review meeting concerning a traffic stop he barely remembered. He scoffed when he saw the name attached to the complaint. "Danielle Price. So she's serious, huh?" But he still wasn't worried. He'd been through a dozen reviews over the years. A few formal write-ups, some temporary desk assignments, but nothing ever stuck. He believed he could walk into any room in uniform and come out clean. What he didn't know, what no one in his precinct knew, was that Danielle had already uncovered a pattern. Danielle's request for public records was more than a routine step. It was a calculated move. Within days, she received documents detailing Officer Delaney's prior stops, complaint records, and body cam summaries. Some had been dismissed quietly. Others were marked inconclusive. But Danielle saw what most hadn't bothered to look for: a thread running through nearly every encounter. Delaney had a tendency to single out people he believed wouldn't push back. Drivers alone late at night. Citizens without legal representation. People who hesitated when questioned. People like her, only she wasn't who he thought she was. She compiled a report. 47 stops over 2 years. More than half had vague justifications like suspicious activity or community safety concerns. Most ended without citation or charges. Danielle marked them on a spreadsheet, color-coded by pattern. Her legal mind worked like a machine, quiet, relentless, exact. By the time the Internal Affairs review began, she had built not just a complaint, but a case. When the day came, Danielle walked into the room wearing a crisp navy suit and heels that clicked with every step. Her calm demeanor made the investigators sit up straighter. Delaney sat across the table, arms folded, feigning boredom. The lead investigator introduced Danielle as Ms. Price, assuming she was simply the complainant. She waited until they finished the introduction, then gently corrected them. "I'm not only here as a complainant," she said smoothly. "I'm here as legal counsel. And I've submitted a formal request for a full inquiry." Delaney blinked. Legal counsel? That's when it hit him. He wasn't the one in control this time. The badge wouldn't shield him from scrutiny. Not here. Not with her. Delaney shifted in his seat, no longer lounging. Danielle handed out printed packets to everyone present. Each document neatly labeled, each section backed by records, timestamps, and excerpts from public video logs. Her voice never rose. She didn't need theatrics. The evidence spoke louder than anger ever could. "Page 3, she directed calmly. You'll see a pattern of discretionary stops that fall outside departmental guidelines. In most of these cases, no warning or citation was issued, just intimidation without probable cause. The internal affairs officers flipped through the pages in silence. One of them raised an eyebrow. "This is thorough, Miss Price." Delaney sat up, trying to cut through the quiet. "Look, I've done nothing outside the scope of my job. These are routine checks. It's part of community protection." Danielle didn't even turn to him. "Then I'm sure you'll have no objection to a deeper audit of all stops over the past 3 years, including those not logged in your written reports." His mouth opened, then closed. One of the panelists leaned in. "Are you suggesting Officer Delaney has failed to log stops?" "I'm suggesting," Danielle replied, "that a pattern of selective memory and undocumented encounters is already emerging, and that the burden of transparency doesn't vanish with seniority." Delaney's confidence began to crumble. He'd been through reviews before, but never one where the person across the table came prepared not just to complain, but to prosecute. And this was only the beginning. Outside the room, 2 journalists who'd received an anonymous tip waited by the elevator. They didn't know the full story yet, but they would soon. Within days of the internal affairs hearing, word of Danielle Price's complaint began to circulate beyond the precinct's walls. The anonymous tip to the local news station ignited a firestorm. Reporters arrived at police headquarters, cameras flashing, microphones poised. Headlines questioned the conduct of a veteran officer, hinting at a culture of unchecked authority. Citizens who had quietly suffered similar stops began coming forward with their own stories. Delaney found himself thrust into a spotlight he'd never wanted. His usual network of support felt strained as whispers spread through the ranks. The badge that once symbolized power now weighed heavy with suspicion. Danielle, meanwhile, remained steady. She met with community leaders, spoke at local forums, and worked closely with internal affairs investigators. Her goal wasn't to ruin a career, she made that clear repeatedly, but to demand fairness, accountability, and change. At a public hearing weeks later, Danielle addressed a crowded room. "This isn't about one officer. It's about ensuring that those entrusted with authority serve with integrity. Every stop, every interaction must reflect respect for all members of our community." The city council promised reforms: new training programs, transparent review processes, and oversight committees. Delaney's future with the force was uncertain. For the first time in a decade, the badge no longer guaranteed power. Officer Mark Delaney sat alone in the precinct break room, staring at his badge on the table. The gleam that once made him feel invincible now seemed dull and heavy. His superiors had placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the full investigation. The community's trust, fragile as it was, had shifted in ways he couldn't ignore. He thought back to the moment he stopped Danielle Price, how her calm confidence had unsettled him. Not because she was confrontational, but because she refused to be intimidated. Over the weeks, Delaney reflected on his actions. He recognized how his sense of authority sometimes crossed into overreach, how the uniform wasn't a license to disregard fairness or respect. When the investigation concluded, it recommended disciplinary action but also mandated training on community engagement and implicit bias for the entire department. At a follow-up hearing, Delaney addressed the panel with humility. "I understand now that respect isn't earned just by wearing a badge. It's earned by how we treat people every day, especially when they feel most vulnerable." Danielle watched from the audience, nodding slightly. He had faced the wrong woman in court, and in doing so he faced a truth he could no longer avoid. A badge could give power, but character gave respect. Months passed and the city's police department slowly began to transform. New policies were implemented, focusing on transparency, accountability, and community partnership. Officers attended workshops designed to improve communication and build trust with residents. Mark Delaney returned to duty, but he was a changed man. No longer relying solely on his badge to command respect, he made a conscious effort to listen and learn from those he once overlooked. He joined community outreach programs and volunteered in local events, seeking to rebuild the bridges that had been strained. Danielle Price continued her work as an attorney and advocate, inspired by the impact one person's courage could make. She and Mark crossed paths occasionally, no longer adversaries but 2 people committed to progress in their own ways. One afternoon, during a neighborhood safety meeting, Mark spoke candidly about his journey. "I was blind to how my actions affected others. Facing accountability was the hardest thing I've done, but it was necessary. I hope to serve this community better every day." Applause filled the room. Sometimes the greatest power lies not in a badge but in the willingness to change. The months following the investigation were a turning point not only for Officer Mark Delaney but also for the entire police department. The internal reforms sparked a ripple effect throughout the force. Officers were encouraged to examine their own attitudes and behaviors, and the department actively engaged with community leaders to rebuild trust. Mark found himself attending workshops on empathy, cultural sensitivity, and ethical policing. At first it felt uncomfortable. Years of operating under one mindset didn't disappear overnight. But with each session he gained new perspectives that challenged his long-held assumptions. One afternoon, during a community forum, Mark listened as residents shared their experiences, not just complaints but hopes for a safer, more understanding neighborhood. It was humbling. It was eye-opening. Danielle Price was there too, not as an opponent but as a respected advocate. When it was Mark's turn to speak, he said, "I stand before you not as someone with all the answers, but as someone committed to learning. I made mistakes, serious ones. But I want you to know I'm here to do better, to earn your respect through actions, not just a badge." The room was silent for a moment before applause broke out. It was genuine, not forced. For Mark, it was a moment of redemption, a chance to move forward with responsibility. Beyond the speeches and reforms, Mark took concrete steps to change how he did his job. He partnered with local youth programs, volunteered at schools, and became an active listener rather than an enforcer alone. His reputation shifted from that of a tough, unyielding officer to someone willing to bridge divides. Danielle and Mark's relationship evolved too. They met occasionally to discuss community issues, sharing insights from their different but complementary roles. There was mutual respect, born from confrontation but nurtured by shared goals. The badge still symbolized authority, but now it was balanced with accountability and humility. Mark understood that real power came not from intimidation but from service. This story wasn't just about one officer or one woman. It was about a community learning to heal and grow together, one conversation at a time. As the changes took root, the city itself began to feel different. Neighborhoods that once held a wary distance from law enforcement slowly opened up. Community meetings became more frequent, not just as formal events but as genuine dialogues where voices were heard and respected. Mark Delaney continued to invest himself fully in this new path. He often volunteered for late-night patrols accompanied by community liaisons, people trained to foster understanding rather than suspicion. On one such night, he encountered a group of teenagers hanging out near a local park. Instead of ordering them to disperse immediately, Mark approached with a calm voice and asked about their lives and concerns. One teen, hesitant at first, opened up about the lack of safe spaces and the feeling of being misunderstood by adults. Mark listened carefully and promised to bring the issue to the community board. Small moments like these multiplied. People who had once feared the police began to see officers as allies rather than adversaries. Meanwhile, Danielle Price worked tirelessly to ensure the reforms were not just symbolic. She advocated for continued oversight and accountability, knowing that progress required vigilance. The partnership between law enforcement and community groups blossomed. Together they organized neighborhood cleanups, youth mentorship programs and forums on social justice and safety. Mark and Danielle co-hosted several of these events, embodying the cooperation their city desperately needed. Still, challenges remained. Some officers resisted the new approach, some community members remained skeptical. But the commitment to dialogue and understanding created a foundation stronger than before. One afternoon, as Mark walked through the neighborhood he had once patrolled with suspicion, a woman approached him. "Officer Delaney," she said, "thank you for listening." He smiled genuinely. "Thank you for giving me the chance to change." That simple exchange symbolized the healing that had begun, a testament to what can happen when people face their mistakes honestly and work together toward a better future. The badge was no longer just a symbol of authority. It was a symbol of responsibility, humility, and hope. Years later, the story of Officer Mark Delaney and Danielle Price became a landmark example of how courage and accountability can transform even the most entrenched systems. Their journey, from confrontation to collaboration, was studied in police academies, legal seminars, and community workshops. Mark, now a senior officer and mentor, often shared his story with new recruits. "A badge doesn't make you powerful," he'd say. "It's what you do with it that counts." Respect is earned every day through fairness, empathy, and listening. Danielle continued her legal advocacy, championing civil rights and police reform nationwide. But she never forgot the local neighborhood where one encounter changed everything. Together, they helped create a model of policing that prioritized community partnership over control, transparency over secrecy, and justice over authority. Their story reminded everyone that real change begins when someone decides to stand up, not just to authority, but for what's right. And that sometimes, facing the wrong person in court can be the best thing that ever happened. The journey that began with a simple traffic stop had grown into a movement, one that changed lives, perspectives, and the fabric of an entire community. Officer Mark Delaney's experience taught him that a badge alone does not grant respect or moral authority. Those come only through consistent integrity, humility, and genuine connection. Danielle Price's courage to stand firm and seek accountability proved that one person's determination can shine a light on injustice and inspire systemic change. Their story became a beacon of hope for communities striving to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve. In the end, the greatest power lies not in a symbol or title, but in the willingness to listen, to learn, and to grow. When we face challenges with honesty and courage, even the hardest barriers can be broken down. The badge may have started this story, but respect and understanding wrote its conclusion.